Welcome to the Williamsville Public Library Museum. Today is September 8th, 2023, and we're here talking to J.R. Fawns and his wife Sharon and a couple of friends about his life in Williamsville. Welcome, thank you for joining us. Let's start with the basics here. Could you tell us, J.R., about your family, when and where you were born, your parents, your siblings?
Well, it's written that I was born in Petersburg, Illinois, but actually outside of the little town of Petersburg. And it's called Tice today. I'm not sure that many years ago if it still was then or not, but that's where I was born, Tice.
And what were your parents' names?
Wilbur Sr. and Ruth.
Okay, did you have siblings?
I had two brothers, and we lost a little baby sister almost at birth, about 8-9 months old, I think, from pneumonia. But I had one brother, Bill, older, 2 years exactly, same day, same month, and then about a year and a half younger, George.
You were actually born outside of Williamsville, so when did you come to Williamsville?
I started in the first grade here in the village, but I think we moved here probably before my 6th birthday, so I always used 5 years old when I came here, so somewhere between 5 and 6 years old.
What was your childhood like growing up here in Williamsville?
Much different than it is today, of course. There's not that many more people, but back in those days, I think we had maybe 400, between 400 and 500 people. Now, I'm not sure, the sign is not updated, I don't think, but we have around 2,000 people here, I think. So between 400 and 500 to 2,000 is a pretty good jump, but it's still a little village.
So when you think back to your younger days, do you remember some of the kids that you played with, some of the things that you did for fun when you're running around Williamsville?
Well, Sharon here, she's always counted the children in our block or two. And how many was it, honey?
Well, actually, it wasn't when you were a little kid.
No,
You might mention you lived on a street called Warpath Avenue because the kids were so mean. And
Really?
I don't know, it was the Gaddy kids and
Well, the Currys were
the Curry.
eventually moved to Williamsville. The Brashears, I can go Edwardses. There were just an awful lot of children, and Warpath Avenue was a good name for it, I think. She said we were.
She said mean. I don't know if you want to correct her on
No,
that.
I don't. Honor. I'll
Okay.
use that one.
Okay, so what kinds of things did you guys do for fun?
We used to have movies uptown at the park. That was a few years later, but it really was a big thing for the village. People would go up there. I'm not sure what time of the week it was, but that was a big deal back then.
What kind of things do you remember most about growing up in Williamsville, aside from the movies and hanging out with friends? What kinds of things do you look back on fondly?
I always come up with this. We had at night, you'd hide and seek,
Sure.
and that was a big deal back then, hide and seek.
Growing up with all those kids, what kinds of things do you think your parents taught you? That kind of lessons that served you well in life?
Well, I think the big word I use, it just came to me as that question was asked, honesty.
Okay.
I think that is a big thing, and I use that, I hope, all my life. I really did.
We'll talk more later about the businesses and such, but as an adult, where did you live and work? Did you live in Williamsville all of your adult life?
Yes, ma'am.
We'll talk more later about the service stations, but did you always work with the service stations, with the gas stations?
Pretty much. I think we'll talk about this later, too. My dad was in the service station business when I was in my early teens, maybe even younger, and I was involved with him with that going on.
So eventually you started your own family when you and Sharon got married. Do you remember what year that was that you got married?
Oh, let me see.
Sharon, do you remember?
A long, long
1955. And I had just come home from the service, and I found her. That's the word I like to use because it actually was a finding. And a friend of mine knew a girl that was with him the night we were out to the movie, and he called her to the car because he and I were in service together. And he knew this young lady, and Sharon happened to be involved with the friendship she had with him. And that's how we first met.
So when you say you were coming home from the service, what service were you coming home from?
I was in the United States Army, and I served in Korea, and I'm proud of it. I'd do it today if I was needed. It was a toughie. A lot of them had a lot worse than I did, but I had it, looking back on it, pretty tough too.
Okay. Well, thank you for your service. When you did get married and had kids, how many kids did you end up having? And did they stay in this area?
Well, our two children were adopted, and
Okay.
they were both babies. We were ready to just say female or male, whatever we could adopt for, and it happened to be a boy the first time.
Hmm.
So Brent was 3 years old when we decided to put in for a girl, and we went not too long after that we finally got the girl. So we're so happy. And I've said this, and maybe it's something that I shouldn't say, but because we couldn't have children for some reason, we went through a lot to try to figure out why. We both love kids, and it didn't work. So that's why we started that. I was getting older, and I've said this, and I know a lot of people probably wonder why I even feel that way, but I do, and I'm honest, and I'm going to say it like I felt. We were blessed we couldn't have children, or we wouldn't have the two that we have.
Right. So things have a way of working out for the best.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And you're lucky because they both stayed in the area, correct?
Right.
In addition to your family, you're being a part of the community, what kind of organizations were either of you involved in terms of being involved in the community?
Well, I was served on the village board, I'm not sure, many, many years ago, before Lee became mayor, and Henry Carter was the mayor. And I remember we started Lake Williamsville. We had to drain Lake Williamsville after a few years. Lee, you remember that? Because it leaked.
Okay.
And it leaked over on the Jones farm, and they're the ones that gave the village the ground to build a lake on.
Okay.
But when it leaked, it became a problem.
So it was flooding
so we
their
drained
field?
it, sealed it, and it's been sealed ever since.
Well, mention the trees. I like the story about the trees you and Henry and
Well, the
Esther
trees that are
McGee.
grown out there,
Hmm.
I can't remember exactly what that machine was called, but we rode it and planted trees, and we planted them too close together. We didn't know that. And after they began to grow, there wasn't enough sunlight for the trees to grow, so they had to remove several of them. And I was in the service station business, and whenever they take a tree down to give more room, they brought them down to my service station, cleaned them up, and sold them
Well, they were for Christmas.
for
Oh,
Christmas.
so these
trees.
were the evergreen trees that are
Uh-huh.
on the other side of the lake. So aside from starting Lake Williamsville, which is pretty big, were there other things in terms of local history that stand out in your mind in terms of maybe big celebrations or events?
Well, when I look back, again, it was a small village, and everybody was so friendly with each other. We knew everybody by name, and that was a big thing for me. And that is, we stayed here all these years, and we think it's gotten bigger, but it's still a village. But it is different now. I like what we got. It's a beautiful, and other interviews that I had during the Korean War, I was asked to do an interview, and one of the questions was, how would you rate the difference between now and then? And the difference is, the town is a beautiful village. It always was, but it got better. And Lee Miller here was the mayor for a while, and I served under him. And I just can't, I've been told that I was a good guy to ask that question because of the way I felt about the village. But it is. We go in and out of small towns through the country. We like that. And you might find one as nice, but you won't find a nicer village than the village of Williamsville. And I truly mean that.
Do you still participate in any of the festivities? Like we've got Autumn on the Boulevard coming up this fall, or anything through your church that you do, or other organizations?
At one time, we were involved in some of these things, but we got old. So now we hear, and the people that go and get involved in it, we pretty well feel like we've been there because we're told very well about what went on.
I know that you mentioned, of course, you'd been in the Korean War. That was obviously very significant to you and your family, but do you think there are any other international events or national events that you reflect back on that affected life here in Williamsville?
You might. I think you ought to mention he kind of enjoys telling that he got to meet a Civil War veteran, which was Uncle Jake Yoakum, and he was involved when they had a parade. He decorated his bicycle, and I think that is kind of significant.
Uncle Jake lived right behind us on the same street.
Okay.
So he had, of course, a lot of friends, and a lot of people will pull it. I'm not sure if he had a wheelchair himself, but people would bring a wheelchair for him to put him in it and take him out for a ride around, and I could still see Uncle Jake Yoakum riding in that wheelchair around town. It was that he was 100 years old.
Okay, so they had a big celebration for his 100th birthday.
Every time he came out, it was a celebration.
Well, thank you for reflecting on your time in Williamsville and looking back on some of your fond memories, and we really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.